Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another session for the Windows Server 2025 Summit. In this one, we're going to talk about a topic that a lot of you have brought up in the past, troubleshooting and support calls. With me, I have a gaggle of technical support professionals that I'm going to introduce right now. So, Mike, why don't you go first and introduce yourself?
Yeah, Mike, I'm a cloud solution architect, so work in Azure, and happy to be here, Pierre.
Okay, and Giles.
Yeah, Giles Pauli. I'm currently in the Windows space, supporting all things Active Directory.
And finally, Jeff.
Yeah, thanks, Pierre. I'm a supportability program manager, and our team predominantly handles storage and high availability, so things like failover cluster, Hyper-V, storage, and Azure Local.
Yeah. Actually, Jeff, every time we have a new kind of like a release or a major release, if I could say, there's always a series of problems that come up. That's normal. I've been in the IT for 30 years and every time is the same. What is one that comes to mind as to like the thing that comes up with 2025?
So we have the ability to look at all the support cases that we're accruing and what customers are running into in terms of their pain points. And the leader so far in terms of the cases that we're getting open is in regards to KMS and activating KMS clients.
What kind of problem is it? Like, are they trying to manage servers the way they manage clients? Like, what's the main issue?
I would say if we broke it down into probably the top two categories, it would be connectivity between hosts and clients and key problems. So we'll get into the details of what some of those issues are and some quick troubleshooting steps on how to resolve them.
Okay. And since we're going to 2025, do they have to like upgrade their KMS server? Was there a process? What's the biggest gotcha on that one?
Well, I'm glad you asked that question, and our first slide kind of covers that in terms of different versions of Windows that you're using and how we support which host can activate which type of client.
Okay, so is the information on that KMS host compatibility table, is that available online? Is for our audience to go and check on their own?
Yeah, this is all publicly available. Everything that I'm going to cover is on our support site. So if you want to go back and refer to any of this after we get done, or you're going through a KMS deployment or trying to activate, just go to learn.microsoft.com, search for KMS, and the first 4 articles will be what we're covering today.
Okay. And other than KMS, what's your second or worst, I should say, or best? I don't know how to gauge that, but support calls, like what's coming up these days?
I would probably say if I try to remember, our top bucket of issues, the next one after that would be the upgrade from 2022 to 2025. So that's a pretty general topic of upgrades. And then there's obviously the host of depending on what that server does. Upgrading a cluster from 2022 to 2025 is a little bit more complicated than say upgrading a KMS server from 2022 to 2025. So
okay, and is the N-4 versus N-2 that we've had in the past, is that bringing up a lot of calls or support issues?
Yeah, if we kind of divide the main issues customers are running into, it would be between connectivity, simple, being able to talk to a KMS server to activate, and using an incorrect key, or well, I'll just leave it at that. Key problems would be the top 2 in that.
And is there a lot of difference between, like, let's say like a Mac key or the standard key? I know in the past you had to like download the volume licensing key, and you only had that if you had a volume licensing agreement with a LAR and stuff like that. Is that all still the same?
Yeah, it's safe to say with Server 2025 that KMS, as you know and love it, has not changed significantly. as we release new versions of server in KMS, there's obviously newer security that we build into it. So, that's the primary driver why you need to make sure your clients and hosts are in the compatibility matrix that we're going to talk about.
Okay. Now let's switch gears a little bit. Giles, I wanted to ask you a quick question on Active Directory, because we all know Active Directory is like the bread and butter environment for all of our audience here. What are some of the issues or symptoms that you've seen with 2025?
Yeah, so 2025, there have been a couple issues that have come out. I think the primary one, especially for Active Directory, was actually network related, where Nick would come online and it would try to understand, am I a public, am I a domain, what kind of network am I on, and it would actually detect the wrong type of network and kind of cause some issues. What we have really seen is engineering, our supportability, PMs like Jeff really step up, and any issues that we've had specifically for 2025 have really been handled very quickly. I think what's most exciting to me is the new feature sets, and then making life easier for the admins. We've really taken a lot of intentionality with changing the way we troubleshoot some of our common issues for Active Directory, and so I'm hoping to get into that today.
Okay, well, don't let me stop you. Get into it. What are the typical troubleshooting issues that our audience should know?
Sure. So I think one of the biggest ones, and this is like a passion area for me, is AD performance, right? So we see that all the time from a support case standpoint, and we as a support org have actually deemed that to be a complex topic, and so I think one of the reasons complex is because of the different kind of workloads that the domain controller can take, right? So you kind of just generically think of authentication and maybe some LDAP, but there's so much more that the domain controller is actually responsible for. So of course that performance can be driven by LDAP, but you also have some other use cases underneath the hood, right? So you have SAM, or the Security Account Manager. Oftentimes that's going to be used for account information or security descriptors. And then you also have LSA over RPC, right? So that's a local security authority. And that's kind of handling that translation between SIDs to names and vice versa, right? So you're sending a SID to a domain controller and it's going to give you back that common name. And so a lot of times we'll get that call where they're saying, hey, I have high CPU, I have high memory, can you please help me? And we always start on the domain controller, right? It's our problem child at the moment. But the complexity really comes in because what you're trying to do from the domain controller side is understand what kind of workload is actually coming to the domain controller. What am I really troubleshooting? Is it one application server sending me constant inefficient LDAP queries? Or is it thousands of clients sending me one or two requests for LSA RPC all at the same time? And so that starts to really make life a little bit more complicated when you start having to turn from just that domain controller and start jumping on other machines for troubleshooting.
Okay, and what would we suggest to our audience would be like their first step, like before they pick up the call and call Jeff?
Yeah. So there's several things built in to the operating system even today. So you have the Active Directory collector set that's in perfmon. It's actually going to give you an HTML report with a whole lot of really good information. But I will also say this, like it is a lot of information. So there are times where even I, as an engineer, I look at that and I try to understand, like, I think LDAP is maybe 20% of this. I think SAM is also contributing. It's hard to really tell where that CPU is coming from. And so your second line of defense is Windows Performance Recorder. And so that is, again, been built in since 2016. If you want to go that extra step, you can load public symbols. But the beautiful thing is, a lot of times, my little secret, I don't even wait for symbols to load. You can just go to CPU sample table and you're trying to understand the workload, right? So you can see the DLL name without having to load symbols. So I understand immediately, oh, it's LDAP, oh, it's LSA, because the DLLs are very straightforward named, right? And so then from there, I'm really trying to understand, okay, next step is who is sending those requests to me? And so that's part of what we're trying to change in 2025. Previously, a lot of it was network traces, trying to kind of do this game of correlation. That's some of the really cool stuff that's coming out in 2025 is new counters for perfmon. Some of that's going to be the LSA counters. We've added DC locator counters. There's new events coming that should be flagged every hour. And it'll tell you your top callers for LSA, your top caller for SAM. So instead of having to wait and actually have another reproduction of that issue, assuming that maybe that issue is intermittent, now we're going to be able to say, hey, go back to that time in your event log. When did you see that spike? Here are your top callers. Let's start going after those clients. So there's a lot of really neat things that we're starting to really empower, not just engineers, but the audience, our customers, our admins, our architects, and really saying, hey, here's how we can help you troubleshoot things without even having to open that support case.
That's great. One thing, if I'm think back of my days and that was a long time ago, so it might not be as relevant, but there was always, because Active Directory is, you never kind of like rip and replace. You always kind of build on to what was there before. And now we're at the point where we're building on something that's been there for 20 plus years. So problems that you may have had in the past, you just kind of brought forward, like missing attributes or missing properties. Is there something that's coming up for you in that end? Because I know I've had issues where like missing a SAM type account type deal, type attribute. And how do we fix that now?
Yeah, absolutely. So that pivots from the what are we seeing in 2025 into the new things we're finally releasing, right? So we have I'll name drop her. I already cleared it. But we have someone in the engineering team, Linda Taylor, who has this tagline that says Active Directory is cool again. And I love it. It's what we're seeing across the board from customers. It's what we're seeing, recognizing that it's the backbone of a lot of environments. Hybrid and on-prem is not going anywhere. So the investment that's coming is not just about new features. It's about how do we make life better? How do we make Active Directory more scalable? How do we take these scenarios like, hey, same account type is missing, or some other foundational attribute to an object is missing? So in 2025, there's absolutely going to be a new repair called Fix Up Object State, which is designed to do exactly that. It's going to be able to look at individual objects and go, what are the system-owned attributes that need to be corrected, might be missing, might be mangled, whatever it is, it'll have that power to go out there and make the object right. Because there's nothing more frustrating than accidentally deleting an object, restoring that object, and now it's missing information, right? We've restored it for a reason, and yet I still have to recreate it. It kind of defeats that purpose of having to restore it in the first place. So a really cool thing coming. Another thing is we almost made it a full decade without new functional levels, but we do have a new functional level coming with Server 2025. And that is aimed primarily at the scalability of Active Directory. So, under that hood, you start talking about databases and we kind of get into this nuanced technical piece about page sizes. But the big takeaway is some of these attributes can now hold, I think, almost 3,200 values. I mean, we're really taking a look at, like what you said, having a 20 plus old product and saying, how do we scale it for the new world? How do we scale it for these massive companies? How do we make sure that we maintain that key architecture in the future?
And that's wonderful, but having to restore items is never a wonderful thing, which reminds me, we should make sure that our audience knows that whenever they're touching AD or anything on their server, make a backup first.
Please. Absolutely.
Please. Let me switch to Mike now, because I have a question on something that's, well, not new, but it's becoming mainstream now. The hybrid portion, or the edge portion, or the adaptive cloud portion, whatever our audience and anybody wants to call it. Like, how does that come in to the mix here?
Yeah, thanks, Pierre. So I work primarily with manufacturing customers, and that's a case where while I'd love everything to go to Azure, the reality is that there are systems that have to be on-prem. And so we have a variety of offerings, whether that's Azure Local for having hyper-converged infrastructure there at, say, like factory floor type scenarios, but there's going to be machines that are on-prem. And so Azure Arc is a service that takes those machines on-prem at the edge, wherever they reside, and gives you management capability to basically project those and make an on-prem Windows server, can also be a Linux machine, and make them a hybrid resource within Azure so that you can govern and secure and manage those machines using Azure as the control plane.
Okay, so we can make servers that are on-prem managed by the same tooling that we have that are developing in the cloud. So does that mean that we have to look at all of our server, or do we just do the ones we need to? And then how do we deal with the multi-tool kind of like situation that we get ourselves in, where we have a set of tools for the on-prem only machines and a set of tools for the on-prem hybrid and cloud machines?
Yeah, exactly. And so those are challenges, especially the multi-tooling, that a lot of customers I work with wrestle with. And if you take something like patching, you could use a variety of tools to accomplish patching. But when you onboard machines to Azure Arc, so take those Windows servers, and really I would say anything and everything that is not in Azure, onboard it to Azure Arc to give you that management of those resources. But take patching again. You can use Azure Update Manager, not just for native Azure VMs, but all of those machines that are running on-prem. And so from a skilling perspective, from a monitoring perspective, you can use that tool, Azure Update Manager, to patch across your fleet. And what's more, use something like Azure Policy to enforce it to be patched and know that you can rely on Azure as the place where you execute and orchestrate that while all along those machines are still resident on-prem.
Okay. If we're going to be looking at all of our servers to be brought in or onboarded to as an Arc-enabled server, well, what's the best way to go about it? Like, because I know I go to Arc and it gives me this script that I need to run. Do I run this on my 1,000 servers? Do I take that script, package it, and put it into a script of some kind that gets automated? What's our recommendation or our best practice for that?
Yeah, so that's certainly something that I help customers talk through, because you're right. You have a script that the portal can generate for you, but ultimately to onboard a machine to Azure Arc, you need to install the Connect to Machine agent and then authenticate it to Azure. And so that can be pushed out through SCCM, through Ansible, or through PowerShell, through group policy. And typically the organizations that I work with have a method of deploying that. But one of the things that I typically help them with is part of that authentication piece involves a service principal that is able to onboard those machines to Azure Arc. So really coupling that with the PowerShell that will be remoted, but certainly don't want to do that individually on each machine unless you have a staff of interns willing to click through the installation process.
A staff of interns and a very open calendar in front of you.
Exactly.
Let's go back to Jeff here, because I'm thinking of all these things like automation and stuff like that. With KMS or with activation, what would you love to get our audience to know, and like what's the first thing they should go and learn?
I would probably say to go to learn.microsoft.com, do a search for KMS, and review some of the information that I'm going to show you on the slides I have for you. We're talking about troubleshooting. So I just took all of the Windows 2025 KMS cases we've had, and I've distilled them down to the knowledge that our users need to know to kind of get their way through doing a KMS deployment or an upgrade or an activation.
Segment is cool.
All right. So the first slide is probably our most important in terms of understanding where you're at, where you want to get to in terms of KMS. The general rule of thumb with KMS is we have two components, the server that's activating and the client that is requesting the activation. Either client or server can be virtual or physical. So the process for doing this doesn't vary whether it's running a Hyper-V VM as a server or a physical machine. So that's not even part of the supportability matrix that I've got here. The general rule of thumb with compatibility is the KMS server will activate versions equal to itself or two higher. And the compatibility matrix that I've got is pointing out if you are in, if you're running Server 2022 as your KMS host, we have required updates that need to be added to make sure that we're compatible with the up-level activation. So for, say 2019, we can activate 2019, 2022, and 2025, assuming you have the updates that are called out on this slide. And again, this is not information that's not publicly available. I've just brought it so that we can kind of refer to the key things you need to go through in terms of your flow when you're troubleshooting KMS issues. The next slide I had gone through and kind of summarized. With KMS, there's about 36 different error codes that we catalog, and I tried to get the top 5 or 6 that customers are running into, specifically with Server 2025. So this would be one of the first things that you'd want to go look at when you're troubleshooting activation issues. And we'll show you how to get these error codes or where you might see them in the following slides. And I won't go through them individually, but I will point out that out of these 5 or 6 error codes here represent probably 95% of the error codes that we saw with KMS. So I wanted to capture the large volume issues, the ones that customers are most often running into. The first one, the one that ends in 7.4, that one is sort of off by itself in that error code generally means there's some connectivity problem between the client and the server, whether it's, can't reach the server, the client is trying to reach a host that's offline, or reach a host that's not running KMS. So that one specifically solely points to connectivity. So troubleshooting that would be no different than if you were trying to troubleshoot connectivity to a file server, and use your standard tool set there. The remaining error codes, all of them refer to something wrong with the key in and of itself. Either you have the wrong volume license activation key installed, or you're trying to activate with an incompatible server version. Let me refer back to the first slide in which we had the different operating system versions here. And this, again, is from our publicly available information, but the thing that caught my eye is the bottom 4 server categories here are Server 2012 R2, 2012, 2008 R2. If I had to give a little pop quiz to, say, Mike and Giles, what would you say would be the number one thing you probably want to do if you're running any of those server versions?
Go for it, Mike.
I think getting extended security updates for 2012 through Azure Arc would be something that comes to mind for me.
Yeah, and I think upgrade and making sure you have that ESU in place if you can't upgrade, right?
Yeah, you both hit on the 2 points to that. Is if you are running server anything below 2016, we are out of support for those. So there are extended support agreements for those products if you have them deployed. But I think the message amongst all of us is get upgraded, because compatibility issues and where we run into a lot of issues. If we take all of our versions of Windows Server and client and tried to make a compatibility matrix of all the different permutations, it just doesn't work well. So that's why I mentioned the easy thing about KMS is if you've got a KMS host, it will activate its peers and 2 versions above. So hopefully you're not running Windows Server 2008 R2. But if you do and have an ESU for it, then make sure you have the required update that it needs to activate. Another thing I was going to mention while we're here is that if you're running KMS as a server, it will activate both client and server versions. If you're running KMS as a client, unlike Windows 10 or 11, it will only activate clients.
I'm really glad that you brought this up, because there's probably going to be hundreds of people in this audience that are looking at us and saying, it ain't broke. My workload is running just fine. So why should I go to 2025? Like, I know of all these other features and these bells and whistles that like I'd love to play with, but right now this particular workload is running just fine on 2012 R2. And those things that you just mentioned, those like slight compatibility issues and problems, I think is where they need to kind of look at this as a whole, and not just workload per workload in terms of upgrading their servers. So thank you so much for bringing that up.
So let go back to the error code slide. Again, I think the main thing to point out about this is not necessarily remember. I don't have these error codes memorized off the top of my head, but these are the most important ones. We'll get to the how you find error codes in just a second, but this would be a good reference slide for some of the top ones that you're most likely to run into. And they include things that I mentioned, like invalid key, incompatible versions. But that top bullet point right there, that is off by itself. That's going to be a connectivity issue. So all client and server versions have this little VB script in there called SLMGR. In looking at all of the Windows Server 2025 KMS cases and how they were resolved, I tried to distill this down into the commands that were most often used and why. Again, these are all publicly documented. If you want to look at some of the different syntaxes for this, you can just go to learn.microsoft.com and do a search for SLMGR. But this is the tool you're going to be using, both to check the status and the current licensing information about your server, which is what the /DLV does. If you try and activate and it does not succeed, you can run the /DLV to get that error code. And that's when you go back to that previous slide to kind of narrow down, do I need to go down a networking path or of troubleshooting, or do I need to start looking at my keys? The command that will install a product key is a /IPK. The product key, that's really up to the user to make sure that they're managing their product keys and getting the correct, we call it a general licensing product key that they'll get from Microsoft. And that's what you want to use when we're talking KMS. It's not going to be the product key that's on the, I'm dating myself, but when we gave out actual software, it had a product key on the back, and that's what we use for retail versions. The first one you're going to use once you install a product key with that IPK is the activate /ATL. Now, if maybe you made a mistake, you lost track of your keys, or you're using the wrong one, you can use the UPK to uninstall the current product key and sort of start you over on a fresh slate. One of the connectivity issues that I mentioned earlier is that it's possible that the KMS client itself had maybe talked to a KMS host in the past and has that information stored. Then when you try and go out to reactivate it or contact KMS server, it may have changed names. It may be, maybe a different role. So there's a switch you can use if you're kind of going down that networking troubleshooting. I know my KMS host is working. I know it's got the right name. The client may have cached an older name or an invalid name. So that CKMS, that's kind of give you an equative of what that would do. Like in the TCP world, would be an ipconfig flush DNS. If you're having DNS resolution issues, that'll clear out the cache. And then the next time you try and activate it, we'll go through the normal discovery process of going out, looking for a KMS server and validating that. So that right there, once if you determine that you're not quite talking to the KMS server that you think you were, that clear CKMS will get you past that.
Yeah, you made the hair on the back of my neck stand up a little bit though when you said VBS.
It's a known extension, so you don't really have to include it if it scares you. You can just use the SLMGR. But there's no reason you need to crack this thing open or deal with it. It's a very streamlined, nice tool to use. There's not a lot of, if you look at the most complicated syntax, it's one or two parameters. So,
and I think that goes back into that one works. So there's no real need to fix that one. But I know all of a portion of our audience right now are screaming at their screen, why don't you make this a PowerShell script?
Well, I guess if you don't mind me interjecting a little bit there, right? I think we did put out public guidance saying that we are, moving VBS kind of towards end of life, if you will. And so I have no doubt that this will be, on everyone's radar, that all these things will be ported over to PowerShell or a new EXE or something like that in the future.
are we all going to hold Giles to that?
I mean, security first, right? And that's our initiative.
Yeah. I want to pivot a little bit to Mike because we talked about like the need to upgrade and why you should want to upgrade like older versions like 2012 R2 and God, if you're still on 2008 to 2025. But for Mike, if we've got servers that are like 2012 R2 or 2016, that may be connected in some way. If we want to bring them into the rest of your enterprise where you've got like a standard 2022, 2025 Arc connected machines, is there a specific process that you would recommend our customers to look at in terms of upgrading to be in line with everything else?
So I would say it's important to know that we kind of talked about this with certain applications where maybe a vendor doesn't support an upgrade to another version, that there are options, like for example, with 2012 to get extended security updates through Azure Arc. And oftentimes that's advantageous because maybe in a few months, the workload's going to be deprecated or upgraded. But in order to have that time to perform the upgrade, you still want to be in support. And so you can use extended security updates through Azure Arc to do that. But I would say also just more generally, when you have an array of Windows operating systems, and again, Azure Arc also supports Linux, so really the whole IT estate is covered. From a specific version perspective, while there's certainly some attractions being able to upgrade to the latest version, Azure Arc and the management capability really obfuscates a lot of the version specific things and gives cloud native tools for the management, whether that's patching like we talked about, or change tracking and inventory, or being able to monitor those machines. So certainly upgrade, but Azure Arc provides really a seamless experience to govern, secure, and manage those machines.
Okay. But if they've got like, and I know that at some point there were some different types or different versions of agents for our connected machines. Is there something in troubleshooting and in rolling this out? Do you recommend just in place upgrades of the agents or removing and reconnecting agents? Is that something that you see a lot?
Yeah, so typically just doing regular updates to make sure that connect to machine agent is up to date. You will see if you are out of date through the Azure portal for those machines, you'll see an indication that it is older. So certainly keep those up to date through the update management system of choice, because new capability as it's released to Azure Arc, you want to make sure that connected machine agent is up to date.
Okay. And my next question is for both you, Mike and Giles. If I have an DC that is whichever forest functional level we're running, are we recommending that DC also be Arc connected?
So from my perspective, I've certainly worked with a variety of the customers who do that so that they can get insight into the machine and again, use Azure as the control plane. Giles, what do you think?
No, I mean, I'm all for using new technology, and we're already in this world where, if you have a hybrid environment, you have open ports using, syncing tools and things like that. I mean, it's not like it adds an extra layer of risk. If anything, I think it minimizes, because you're really using that one tool or those specific Microsoft URLs that you're already used to, that you already have in your firewall. So I mean, from that security posture, from that domain controller side, I am absolutely fine with being Arc enabled and being able to make sure that you have a single point where you can actually watch patches, make sure you're up to date, especially with all the security hardening and things that we're pushing. It is so important for all those domain controllers to be at the same patch level, because when you start talking about Kerberos under the hood and maybe some of your DCs are patched, some of them aren't, you start getting into some of those compatibility issues. So all for it.
Yeah, and if I could add, so one of the capabilities with Windows management tools within Azure Arc is a Windows Server best practice assessment. So you can see that at scale, both for domain controllers and all the other Windows servers that are onboarded to Azure Arc.
Good. That answers that questions for me. Giles, we mentioned Active Directory is great. I'm thinking in my mind that were mentioning hybrid with Mike. So I've got servers everywhere. Some workloads need to be AD connected, some don't. What is your recommendation? But also, do you see a kind of troubleshooting and problem that are being reported in terms of machines in Azure, for example, that need to be connected to a local Active Directory? And how do we go about that?
For sure. So I'll tackle that last one because I think it's the most straightforward in my mind. It's really interesting when you start talking about the cloud, and we have we have this term called the cloud, but from my perspective, and I may get shunned for saying this, it's like another Active Directory site to me, right? It may not live in your data center, in your warehouse, but when you're starting to talk about the logistics and architecture, yes, it's cloud, but it's another AD site. It has its own subnets, own IP address scheme, all that good stuff. So really, I see the same problems that you have the moment you add a new Active Directory site. And I think it's funny. I mean, Jeff already alluded to this with the #1 KMS error code. Network, network, network. Everything is network connectivity. I see all the time where we like to lock things down, and absolutely we need to have a good security posture and standing. But if you start blocking, TCP port 88, don't be surprised if you start seeing Kerberos issues, and you start seeing these things happen where we add new sites, but we don't do that second step of that due diligence of how I opened up this environment to allow all the functionality I need. So I mean, absolutely, if you want to go old school, Netmon's your friend, Wireshark's your friend. Be able to at minimum, if you're not a networking person, at minimum, be able to go, I know what a send retransmit is. That will tell you if you have a blocked port or not, because it's that in that three-way handshake, it's that first hello, and then you got nothing back but dead silence, right? And so that's that telltale sign of I reached out and I don't think I made it to the other side. And that should be your next step of, did I not have the open ports that I needed for whatever workload I'm trying to do? And then your first question, I mean, spreading out things that maybe AD related or not Active Directory related. I guess I'm going to turn it back and go, what do you want from that response, right? I mean, give me more.
The old consultant answer. It depends.
Yeah, I mean, it always depends, right? I mean, Active Directory is so integral to almost everything we do these days, whether it is, authentication, signing on with username and password, whether it's Windows Hello for Business and needing to find a KDC certificate. I would say by and large, it is rare for you to not need a domain controller that's reachable, right? Obviously there are applications that are standalone that may not have authentication. But I mean, the moment you say, I need to authenticate, welcome to Active Directory, welcome to Intra ID, and everything that goes with it.
And I think that's what the three of you are saying so far really resonates with me. But we're in this inflection point in time where the cloud environment and the on-prem environment are just as important to each other, and how we negotiate that connection in between is what is becoming more and more important. So, Jeff, if we're got machines on both sides for activation purposes, which are we activating cloud machines with our KMS server? Like, how are we dealing with those multiple types of machines in an environment where you're trying to standardize activation?
I think the simplest way to answer that is you don't need to worry about it.
Okay.
Activation itself is platform agnostic in terms of it doesn't know whether it's running an Azure server or one on premise or a virtual machine running on your desktop. So I would say the more important thing is to make sure you're in that compatibility matrix and that the required updates have been installed. But I don't want to say that no different, but that it really is troubleshooting in whether they're machines in Azure or on-prem, not really any different. Might be a little bit more complicated in terms of things like, as Giles was mentioning, ports that might be blocked. But that's when you kind of step outside any kind of KMS technology and just, get your hands dirty and troubleshoot networking issues. Which, that at the root, that can cause obviously a host of problems. So you fix that problem, more than likely all the other rest ones will nicely fall into place.
Yeah, and I don't want to go back into a Wireshark session, because we could do a couple of hours on that, starting with how do you connect a wire that doesn't exist, that is virtual.
And Pierre, I do want to take the opportunity just to plug, some of the work that a cloud solution architect like myself can help with, spanning on-prem and cloud, talking through express route connectivity and really making it a seamless and straightforward connection, so that whether it's on-prem or in Azure, that's part of what I typically help customers with. So while we're talking about packet captures, those sorts of things, no one should be scared by that. You've got a team of architects that can help with that.
That's great. That's fantastic. Everything we've talked about so far, I feel from the three of you that it takes a very specific kind of like mind frame to do troubleshooting. Back in the day, I'm going to age myself here. That used to be my number one question, my first question in an interview when I was hiring tech support guys or girls, which was summarize in a few sentences your troubleshooting methodology. And the answer I was looking for is eliminate the obvious and go from general to specific, which is what you guys have communicated. But in terms of mindset, Giles, I want to turn to you, because you mentioned something in our prep meetings about burnout and case fatigues and stuff like that. Can you kind of elaborate a little bit on that, like kind of like the soft skills of troubleshooting?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's something that we don't always give enough credence in our space, right? I know this is Server 2025 Summit. This is not Server 2025 specific. This is just human life specific. And so I'm actually going to take this opportunity to steal the screen share from Jeff here. So this is a very common model when you start talking about burnout. And I think even the word burnout kind of has a little bit of a bad rap. It used to be called care fatigue. So the idea behind this is that it really started to come out with actually like hospital workers or aid workers for like the Red Cross, who actually boots on the ground, or in other countries were away from friends and family and their social support system. But I think what you find is in the IT world, and I'll just, I'll be very blunt and honest about my own life, in the support realm, right? There is this level of we are dealing with critical situations. We are dealing with people. I have yet to have the phone call where when someone calls me to tell me that everything is working great, right? It just hasn't happened in my 12 years yet. So there's this idea of I need to be empathetic and I need to always be on, but that costs me as a person something, right? And so you have this model where you have job demand, job control, and social support. And just to do like a real brief rundown of what these are, I think job demand is obviously, I think everyone's kind of familiar with this, right? It's that constantly being on that I was referring to. It's high workload, right? It's being overextended for a period of time. Job control, a little bit more nuanced, but relatively straightforward. I mean, this is that idea that you are in control of your day, that you are kind of feeling maybe powerless to make any changes. Maybe you're feeling micromanaged. This is kind of that natural life just happens, rather than you trying to be a part of changing that or having a seat at the table to make a decision. And then social support, right? So this is actually the most important part of the model. I think this is an interesting place because you can tell from the backgrounds of all our cameras, we're all work from home. But this was a very real thing that happened when we lost the floor, right? When we were not working side by side in the office or with our teams. So you have that social support and that structure. And so we're really dependent on having the community. And I don't know about everyone on this phone call, but I have this I have this struggle sometimes where I have a very IT centric day job, but not all my friends are in the IT industry. So sometimes your stories don't quite connect. And so being able to share that with a Mike or a Jeff or a Pierre, someone who gets it, who has lived it, and even maybe experiencing it with you is incredibly meaningful. This idea about burnout, we've kicked this around many times in the Windows leadership calls, just to be very honest with you. And it comes down to these few things. Like if you are feeling that, stretched, you're too thin, it's not necessarily an easy recovery. But I will say these things for you. Daily recovery is vital, right? I think sometimes we get in our head that we're working for the weekend, and that actually puts us further into the hole, right? Like if we aren't making sure that we have that social outlet on a daily basis, it becomes very hard to manage. And so when you start talking about recovery or how do I get out of this state of burnout, you have different levels of activities that you can participate in, that you can force yourself some days to do. So you have low cost activities. And this is literally I'm done working. Let me go flop on the couch, turn on the TV, and I'm going to become that couch potato for the next 2 hours. You have physical activities, right? You have sports, yoga, exercise, go out, go for a walk. And then you have the social activities. And I know maybe this is unfair in this day and age, but I'm actually still an introvert. And I think a lot of us who get into the IT world, we probably still lean a little bit that way. But social activities, spending time with friends and family is actually the only kind of activity that has been shown to provide both physical and cognitive rest. And so when you're starting to talk about best bang for your buck, how do I move through burnout? You're talking about being able to be sociable. You're talking about being able to share your story. And I don't want this to be burnout by Giles. So the little plug is I actually have my master's in psychology, believe it or not. And here I am solving Active Directory issues. But we were taught that literally 80% of a therapeutic process is just helping someone tell their story. So being able to share, hey, I had a really miserable day. Let me tell you under NDA how bad my life was with this customer, right? Like being able to share those kind of things, and even for like the enterprise admins and architects, like you're tied to your phone, right? You know when that call is coming, you know when you're on call. Like there has to be that separation and being able to engage in honestly social activities. I mean, it is the number one way that we as humans are able to truly recover.
Well, I'm really glad you brought that up, and that I see a bit of myself in that. My hockey league, which has nothing to do with IT, they call me the propeller head in there because apparently working in IT doesn't qualify as a cool job for police officers and military guys that I play with. But I get it. We do have a group of Microsoft dispersed people, like, because we're globally, my team is global, where we do Call of Duty 2 times a week,
Oh, that's awesome.
late at night. So I get that, and I really appreciate you bringing that up. It's something that I know we need to talk about more, and that our audience needs to hear and take to heart a lot more. So I will go back to Jeff and say, Jeff, in closing, what is your 1 or 2 things that you want everybody in the audience to start doing? Keep in mind, like, what are your closing thoughts for our audience on our way out?
Well, I spent most of my career doing direct troubleshooting support with customers. And there are times, and I think anybody here probably can understand that there's some parts of you that miss that, that instant feedback you get from resolving a case and knowing that, yeah, I knocked that one out. When you move out of that world and more into, training and readiness, things like that, the gratification is not as instant. So there is that part that I miss, in interacting. I think that's something Giles touched on, is the interaction with people, is critical. And that's I think he's spot on to kind of point out, even for introverts that, which I was surprised. I thought that was fairly rare in our industry. But I take that to heart, and I had been working from home a bit before COVID, but mentally I knew I could always go back, once personal situation got to the point I could, and then COVID hit, and that option was gone. So there was an adjustment you had to do there of knowing, what am I going to do if I just can't, if I just need to get out there and be social. So I think what Giles is pointed to is key to that. And I think we all run into that, whether you're the guy that's on, I think I remember being on call, for a week at a time, and you do give up your nights and your weekends, and that part I don't miss. But,
I don't think anybody would miss this pager duty.
Oh no.
the dreaded words on call. If my phone rings in the middle of the night, even if it's a spam call, I still tense up. Like, oh God, what am I going to be? What duty what duty manager is going to hand to me now? And thankfully, it never is. It's usually just from remember that feeling. I don't think ever leaves you. So in terms of the going from my bearded down here with KMS, I think the things I would probably hit on is that the majority, at least with 2025, the majority of the problems are going to either be network connectivity or some issue with your key. So go for the low hanging fruit. I think we brought that, we kind of touched on that with our troubleshooting. Go for the low hanging fruit, the easy stuff. Don't dive right into thinking you need to attach a debugger to your KMS host to figure out an activation issue. So make sure your versions are compatible in that matrix. Make sure all your clients and servers have the right updates they need to. Get tuned up with network diagnosing between client and server. And proper key management would be another one. And make sure your keys are available and that you've got access to them for people that need them. And making sure both your clients and servers are not only updated with the required updates, but I think in general, we generally say keep them up to date as best we can.
Hey, keep them secure too, because a Mac key can do a lot of damage if it goes out. Mike, same closing thoughts from you.
Yeah, so a couple things come to mind. First, you got machines that are on-prem, onboard them to Azure Arc. And related to that, if you have a unified support agreement, there are cloud solution architects like myself who can help talk through migrations of Windows Server to Azure, make sure that networking is squared away, and really help with anything and everything related to Azure and migrating Windows servers.
Good. And closing us out, Giles.
Sure. So, first and foremost, Active Directory is cool again. On a serious note, behind the scenes, whether you see it or not, what I wanted to talk about was the non-security related features that are coming, because we know that there's a security first initiative that Microsoft is driving hard. So I wanted to bring that forward because I want you guys to see that it's not just about security, it's also about making Active Directory better and scalable again. So use Feedback Hub. Behind the scenes, there are a lot of people from support that moved into engineering roles and have a fantastic understanding of what it's like to be on that customer side or be the admin side. And so that feedback is absolutely golden. Please, please, please use Feedback Hub.
That's it. Well, let me take that last one and say feedback is very important. So for all of you watching this session, there's going to be a QR code somewhere on that screen to evaluate this event. Let us know what you think. Did we hit the mark? Give us some constructive feedback. We love to hear from you. And with that being said, Jeff, Giles, and Mike, thank you so much for spending the last almost hour with me and addressing some troubleshooting and issues that are common with our audience. So with that being said, thank you very much.